doing, Toby?
I'm all good, thank you.
Okay.
I've just been struggling to get on.
That's okay, I do understand. Okay. So we're just seeing if there's anyone else here. Other than that, welcome to week 12 of our course, our penultimate session. And we'll have one more session after this. And of course, you have your final assignment to be working on. Now, this week, we're looking at emerging educational models. So last week, we looked at traditional educational models and where education has fundamentally been over the last few decades. And this week, we're looking at where things are just starting to emerge and transition to. And next week, we're going to look at some really transformational models of education, where education may go in really significant changes. Okay, so this week we had a number of readings for you to look at again, 3 main ones. And let's jump in and have a look at the first one. Let me just make sure we jump to the right one. Okay, so you're seeing that reading on the screen now? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Fine.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, so this is one that looks at setting out a roadmap of 21st century learning environments. So some planning tools around creating a learning environment for today, what we should be aiming towards or should be achieving. And it goes through a whole range of examples. The reason I've included this one is because it provides lots and lots of examples of situations where these things have been enacted in schools. Not necessarily in their entirety, but in at least some aspects. So we'll pop on down to where it starts. So first off is around defining what 21st century learning is, and in particular about the idea of a 21st century learner. So some of the attributes of a 21st century learner being that they're very socially connected with social media. Yep. They are very flexible and expect that flexibility in the educational environments that they learn in. They're generally more accepting of diverse populations, so they're more familiar with different types of people and different cultures. They demand instant contact and interactions. They're always connected and always engaged with information and with their friends and with entertainment. And they engage with and consume a lot of media through their mobile devices, prefer interactive media, and very rapid delivery of content and information. Of course, they're very used to receiving that through the internet, through computers, video games, etc. And in the main, they're multitaskers. They enjoy doing more than one thing at once. So a couple of other attributes around 21st century learners and learning environments. What used to be the minorities are now becoming the majority. So the fact that we have had a lot of children born over the last few generations, and they're now becoming dominant. That's a little bit different in Australia than the rest of the world, and in America and Western countries where we've got a large baby boomer bubble, but they're all starting to retire now. A lot of them are English as not being their first language, because a lot more globalization and internationalization of education, a lot more recognition of learners with disabilities, and the need to engage with them in mainstream education processes, where in the past that may not have been the case. A greater recognition of diversity and the impact of low income and disadvantage in terms of social situation for learning. And the idea that we're preparing students for a new world of work and society that's very different from the current one, where it's commonly sort of cited that 40% of the jobs existing today won't exist in 20 years' time. They'll be transformed into different types of jobs. Robotics and automation will take over a huge amount of current employment opportunities. And even in those areas that we thought were fairly secure in terms of the knowledge-based economies and even creative economies, a lot of those are now being supplemented by automation and computer systems, particularly with the advent of artificial intelligence and the idea of knowledge assistance, where while they may not be taking over the jobs, they'll certainly be assisting people with their jobs and reducing the number of people needed in those particular jobs. We're seeing that in areas where they've put a lot of investment into this at the moment in terms of financial planning, some areas of the military strategy planning, where we can use computers to assist us in making complex decisions, where in the past we might have had 30 or 40 people involved in making those decisions. Now just a couple of people can do that with the support of technology. So how to plan an educational environment to meet all of these needs for the 21st century? Remembering that we're now 16 years into the 21st century, and it's really something that we have to be accepting. So this particular document goes through a range of strategies. It gives a topic and a description of what those strategies are. So fundamentally, of course, being educationally focused, we're interested in the learner and improving the learning process for students. We have a whole range of processes around teaching and professional learning for teachers to ensure that our teachers and our teaching workforce has the best knowledge of ways of teaching, but also of content and other aspects of technology. There's a huge emphasis on accountability and assessment, and we need to transform that into more valid uses of those processes, rather than sometimes at the moment they're not necessarily as they don't follow through in terms of the promises of what the tools are being designed for in terms of improving student learning. Of course, they're being used for other purposes. There's an increasing emphasis on leadership and the culture of the learning organization, where it's not just a matter of introducing new technology or new pedagogy or new strategies, but we actually have to change the culture of the learning organization to really see significant change. And also we need some infrastructure. We need the physical assets, we need the human resources in terms of teachers, and the supporting aspects in terms of technical support and other supporting mechanisms needed to make the learning environment work effectively. So that's a quick summary of the document. Whoops. I need to just stop that sharing, otherwise you'll all go strange. Okay, so do we have any questions or comments on what I've just gone through there? Someone's got some interesting sound effects going on in the background. So from your experiences, where do you see education going in general? We've talked a lot about these different possibilities during the course, but in terms of creating this 21st century learning environment, what are your opinions on the perspectives being put forward in this paper? Are we on track for doing this at the moment? Should we be doing it? Patricia, any ideas?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, sorry, I was making my dinner. It's kind of like the Americans say, we hold these truths to be self-evident. You know, I've noticed, I mean, it's just so obvious really, but Yeah, there's a big cultural change. People have to see, like industry drove, the Industrial Revolution, that drove education in the beginning. And now we're having the robotic revolution, if you like, the digital revolution. So that too will shape education, but it's just so much slower. It's like the pace of change, because the syllabus, the curriculum has to change. But I always worry about those who are left behind.
Absolutely. I think the evidence might point to an acceleration of change. In the past, it did take a little bit longer to make major changes. And we have gone through a couple of changes. Certainly there was the Industrial Revolution, which changed us from an apprenticeship-based, community-based teaching approach to an industrialized schooling system. But we also, during that period, also had a change towards an information economy or a service economy, which did shift things as jobs shifted initially from the farms to the factories in the Industrial Revolution, then from the factories into service work. There was a reasonably significant shift in education as well. But you're correct, we're now looking at another shift towards automation. And it'll be interesting to see how quickly education responds to that process. And this course is part of that, in identifying the needs for that change. And it's happening to a little bit in schools at the moment. There's a big emphasis now on STEM and computing and programming and robotics. So it's being recognized, but only in hindsight.
Yeah.
So how about those from other countries? Do you see a significant change in the economies of your countries as we move towards automation and service industries?
Jason, I got a bit of thought here to say.
Yep.
And I'm just reflecting on the digital divide that we have. I am just thinking about the inaccessibility problem that we have, particularly in my country. The internet access and even the technology, the access to mobile phones and all that is still an issue. The large population is not accessed as yet, and when I compare it to say in other countries, Western world, it is more of advanced, and that's what we are talking about here. And that's the issue I see. So digital, like through education system that we have, we may eventually get there, but it will take really a while. Particularly from the context that I come from, and I am looking at it in that angle as a big issue still to do with digital divide. That's my thought. Thank you.
It will, absolutely. And in terms of fundamental infrastructure, but also in terms of societal change and a whole lot of other aspects, most of our discussions are based on a Western perspective, and there are definitely different perspectives. There are certainly different perspectives from emerging nations, such as Papua New Guinea, but there's also different perspectives from other very well-established cultures, such as in China and much of Asia, but also in the Middle East and other areas where they do have a very different perspective on change and indeed education than we have in the Western culture. So yes, this course is as guilty as most Western commentary on changes in society. We do have a particular lens that we do look on, and I do recognize that you have different lenses, which is very important. But hopefully you'll, in particular, because I don't want to say that we're more advanced, because that's not necessarily the case, but we're on a particular pathway, and we've gone through a number of steps to achieve that. And there is an argument being put forward that not every nation and culture has to go through all those same steps, and that there may be opportunities to leapfrog things and to jump ahead. And that certainly has happened in some Asian countries, particularly the smaller ones that are able to be very agile and approach things in particular ways. So there are lots of examples where countries have managed to become, in some cases, even more advanced than Australia and America and so forth, by learning from what other countries have already done. And Papua New Guinea may be able to achieve something similar. It does take a lot of leadership and a lot of allocation of resources, and I do understand the challenges that a lot of countries have in those respects. But it certainly shouldn't take as long as the process that would happen in the Western countries, hopefully. UNESCO and many other organisations are trying to work out ways to fast track different outcomes. And certainly we've seen a lot of outcomes being attempted to be achieved through the United Nations and UNESCO and other world bodies to advance all countries towards different aspects, and education is certainly one of them. But yes, no, you're absolutely correct. There are some big challenges in many countries.
Yeah, sure. I'm not really pessimistic about the change here, but the way the development is going on today in the country and the trend of changes, we hope to get even research into it, and the telecommunication development and all that tailored towards getting some with it. So I hope in future we will be in par with certain other developing countries, and perhaps some years later, as I have indicated in my assignments and others. So thank you for the sharing.
No, absolutely. And there are some big technological advances that may fast track things even quicker. Google's airships, where they're hoping to fly balloons around the world, providing wireless access to everyone, looking as though it is working. And that may be a solution that will assist large areas of the world that don't have the physical infrastructure for telecommunications and other access points. And certainly the cost of computers themselves has dropped phenomenally, where a computer that would have cost, for people in a developing country, a year's wages is now down to a week or so's wages. So things are changing rapidly in that respect in terms of just access economically to the technologies that we now take for granted. So yeah, things are certainly progressing, and they've still got a way to go, but that's part of the process of education and of leadership and all those elements. Okay, does anyone else want to make a comment before we move on?
Yeah, in India it's the same condition, but India some parts are like the progression take place very fast, but in some part very slowly. There in India policies are already made, but it will take time to implement in all the schools of the India.
No, absolutely. India is a very interesting case. It has some incredibly highly advanced technologies, and some areas of India are certainly equal to anywhere in the world, but it's a very small percentage of the population that has access and is engaged with that. And India seems to be having difficulties in scaling solutions up to the whole population. China, on the other hand, has been very successful in doing that, where they had a very focused approach to ensure that everyone would sort of improve, and have, in the main, made some significant advances in that respect. And it's been a little bit disappointing that India hasn't been able to achieve something similar, but I know that they're working very hard to do so. It's just there's a whole range of different cultural and economic aspects involved in India that other countries don't have as many challenges in that respect in. But certainly there are some areas where India is well ahead. But that's a challenge again.
Yeah.
Hutan, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, please. In Iran also, because the Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
In Iran, because the government, after Revolution 1979, the government have anti-Western culture. They consider the internet as a Western culture that try to change our culture. But the fact is that they don't want people to be informed about the truth that is going on around the world, and they want to keep people isolated. So that's why they don't want to. They don't want the free the free information for everyone. So they just say that internet is the culture attack of the Western countries to us, and just like this, and that's why I think that our education is just like the 50 years ago. It hasn't changed at all, and so that's why in my dream that I have for the future, and also I've written my assignment about that. The organization that I've chosen is a private school that's it's not much depends on the government, at least financially. It's not depends on the government, and fortunately, I can say in some aspects, fortunately, some aspects, unfortunately. There are some private schools in Iran that only rich people can attend them, but the part is that those schools financially are strong, so it would be the opportunity to create technological school as an example, that we can show that we can use the technology, and we can use the internet and other aspects of technology, and also nothing bad would be happen. So I hope that to conduct a private school in Iran, and so we will build an example, and after that I hope that the public schools also start to adapt with the new technologies.
Yes, and that certainly has been an expectation of private schools in Australia as well, because they aren't governed by an overarching perspective. They do tend to be more diverse and try different approaches, and have a little bit more freedom to be experimental in that respect. Part of the reason why some of the governmental systems in Australia are now introducing partially privatised schools, so that they can have more freedom to experiment with different approaches that a systemic approach sometimes inhibits. And yes, China is a similar country where there is some restrictions on internet access. And in fact, many countries around the world have different levels of restriction. But that said, even within Australia, we have some of our school systems that have quite rigorous restrictions on what students and indeed what teachers can access. And so it's not just nations that impose such environments, but also some of our own schooling systems. Okay, so let's get back to the document. Okay, there we are. So the document goes through a whole range of examples. Let's get down to some. Okay, well, you can read through the different stages and the theoretical aspects, but one of the key aspects that I wanted you to get from this document were the examples that are occurring in schools of these various elements. So here, again, we see a whole range of different elements that you could introduce into your learning environment as part of your implementation plan. So having connections to the real world, being able to access the learning opportunities from anywhere at any time. So having different time frames for the educational environment, having opportunities for students to learn from home or from a hospital or from wherever they might be traveling, being hyper-connected and using mobile devices so that students can again learn from different areas. And then we see the exemplars. So here are a whole lot of schools and other learning environments that have implemented some of these elements. And you can go to their web pages and read the summaries about them to get different ideas for your own implementation plans. So here we've got a elementary school where it's very differentiated, where all the students have personalized learning environments and plans, and have got a particular focus on ensuring that they develop the strengths required for each individual student. And you'll find lots of other examples in each of the different aspects. So here, in the terms of preparing the teachers, in terms of their professional learning, you've got again a whole series of elements around planning, building, and transformative progression, around their knowledge of content, their pedagogy, their learning environment, similar to the TPAC model that we've discussed. And again, though, you've got all the exemplars. So the big advantage of this document is in providing those exemplars. And you can look at those, again, with assessment and accountability. You've got the examples again. Then you've got examples from leadership and building the culture of the school. Having the community being involved, distributed leadership, a culture of tolerance and being open, having visionary leadership, and leadership that advocates for teachers and students. So having the focus of leadership being on a service model where you're providing service to those you're responsible for in terms of the teachers and the students in the learning environment, rather than sometimes there's more of an entitlement sort of philosophy in some leadership or some organizations with terms of their leadership. And again, lots of examples there that you'll find and elements that you can implement. So here in Minnesota, they've created an inclusive culture of innovation among its educational community, using technology to embrace new processes, et cetera, et cetera. And you can go into the examples and look at those if you wish. And finally, there's the infrastructure. So particularly for those of you that have infrastructure as the main concern for your learning organizations, if you're in a developing country and so forth, there's some elements there that you can look at. Let's have a look at some. So having connections with Wi-Fi, accommodating a range of devices, having good technical support, having professional learning to support people in the use of the technology, protecting privacy and data, and addressing the physical needs of the learning environment with regard to efficient or effective electrical systems and other elements that are required for the technical aspects to work effectively. And there's some examples then of schools where and organizations where that's happened. This is focused around the United States, so it's not necessarily a developing country perspective, but some of the same principles should apply. Okay, so any questions on those elements?
Jason, a lot of when I was in the States, you know, we read a lot of that sort of stuff, but So from living there as well, a lot of those school districts are school districts where the parents are all like in the top 5% of the salary earners in the US. And they also have very strong links into the business community. So they get a lot of their funding, you know, from a particular area, which is great. I mean, money's money. However, it really is at least a two-tiered system in the States, which I'm sure you're aware of. And that's what worries me about here, that the digital divide doesn't just exist in New Guinea or wherever, you know, because we do have the restrictions put on the state schools that simply aren't there in a lot of the private, and in the States they're the chartered schools as well. So it's always a cause of concern for me, because I don't want to see that developing here as well, like a two-tiered system. But I don't know on a systemic level what we can do, because people don't seem, the state system, they don't seem to see the value of developing financial ties into the business community. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're totally correct. In fact, in many respects, every school in the United States is a private school, supported by their local community and funded by that local community at the level that the community decides upon. And it's a very challenging environment to enact any systemic changes. That said, the federal government there is putting a lot of money into particular programs to try to address those needs, but they certainly didn't have or don't have anything like a Gonski needs-based funding model. That is very much against US culture, where they expect failure to occur. And it's through that process that some of their greatest successes have been achieved, because it's really a sink or swim environment, where if you don't succeed as a community or as an individual,
yes, very much.
Yeah, then you're on your own, and you will fail, and you'll fail big. And that's the whole aspect of their healthcare system and education system, and a whole lot of other aspects.
I have gained a respect for that, a little respect for that philosophy of personal responsibility, which I get. I really do have a far better understanding of it. I just don't happen to agree with it as completely as they do.
Absolutely. But through their extremes, and you've got the extreme bads, but you've also got some extreme goods. Their culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, which is fundamental to that system, has achieved some significant advances well in advance of most other areas of the world. So while it's very easy to say what a horrible system that is for those that are disadvantaged, for those that are advantaged, it is a very successful system. Certainly not the culture we have here in Australia, and in fact most other areas of the world, but for the United States it does seem to work, at least for the majority who either gain some success out of it or don't mind because they've got the potential for success.
Right. Yeah.
There is a lot of concern that the minority, as it used to be, that never was going to achieve success, is a growing number, and there may be a point where the system fails because that number becomes more than the system can bear. But that's something that they're trying to, or at least in some ways, address. But there's a lot of societal aspects to that which we don't necessarily have here in Australia. And our system of private and governmental schools is a very different culture to the United States culture. Our private schools really emerged initially as the only schooling system in Australia. And it was several decades after that we then introduced comprehensive schooling that was government supported. And there's a lot of arguments around the disparity between that's involved in that system. But we do definitely have a two-tiered system. And some would say multi-tiered, because while the private schools do have the elites, there's also a lot of not particularly wealthy private schools that are less well funded than most state schools.
Yes, yes.
And there are some state schools that are better funded than many private schools. So we've got a very complex system at the moment in Australia. And part of that was why Gonski was introduced, to try to level that playing field. But there's a lot of people that gain advantage out of an unlevel playing field, unfortunately, and they often are in positions of decision making. So it was very surprising that Gonski got as far as it did.
Yes, so true.
But at least in Australia, we've got that on the agenda. We're discussing that. Most other areas of the world certainly would never be discussed in England. The class system in England is still very entrenched. The class system in America, while it's very much more complex, is very entrenched.
Yes.
Here in Australia, at least we're discussing those things. So that's a positive.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions about what we were discussing in the document? Okay, let's pop and have a look at some of the other ones. Now, the next bit is a particular research model that I've been using for a number of years, which is called socio-ecological modeling. So this is a model that I use a fair bit in assisting schools and leaders in schools make transformational changes. So what it recognizes is that there's a whole lot of influencing factors on anyone in making a change. So to get someone to adopt a new change, say if we're going to introduce a new technology into a school, say iPads, and to actually engage people in that change, you need to actually engage them with a whole range of things that they value. And there are certain things that you value around yourself as an individual, your relationship with others, the organization that you're part of, the community that you're part of, and then a higher policy level aspect where sometimes you'll do things because of policy directions and initiatives, particularly if you agree with them. So let me just take you through socio-ecological modeling. So at an individual level, you might decide to make a change because it's going to have an impact upon yourself. So you may really like technology, and so you want to engage with it, or you might have some children and you want to have, well, that's probably more interpersonal, but there may be some other aspects related to your engagement with the change being proposed because of your own individual perspective on that change. One aspect of an individual perspective is you may not want to change because you're about to retire. So you know you're going to be retiring in a couple of years' time. You don't want to have to learn all this new stuff and incorporate that into your teaching because it's going to be a lot of extra work and you're not going to see a long-term benefit from that. So there, if that was the main driver influencing you to change or not to change, then that would be the thing that would need to be addressed in order to get you to engage with the change. So it may be showing you how you could gain very immediate educational benefits for your students as a result of enacting some change, rather than trying to get you involved in long-term planning around a particular change. So at an interpersonal level, it's more about your engagement with your peers and certainly with your students as a teacher. So you may be happy to change because the rest of your staff room is also changing. They're on board with it, so you feel that you need to be on board with it as well because you want to be a team player and assist things out there. Or you may see benefits to your students. And if that's your main driver for change, then identifying the advantages to your students that this extra work that would be involved could affect, that would be what would be targeted. Now, other things might be you might be moving up the leadership ladder and you may be aiming to become a leader in the organization. So there, addressing the organizational needs may be the main driver for you. So if we can show that getting involved in this change means that you can showcase your leadership and your innovation, so it's more likely that you'll get promoted, then that may be the driving focus for you. And we can get you, a strategy might be to get you involved in a project so that you get your name on it and go out to some conferences and present on that and become well known about it. And then there are some other levels of change. So it might be in terms of the community. You might be really concerned about students in the future being engaged with new technology so that there'll be jobs in the community and we'll have a prosperous, thriving society. And that may be your main driver. And so seeing those larger perspectives and getting the change enabled to, it might be in a small town where the economy is collapsing. So having some new technologies brought in and the students prepared to engage with that may be seen as a way of keeping that community alive. Or it might be in an indigenous community where there may be opportunities for employment and growth and social cohesion around some technological changes or other innovations. And then finally, you may be engaged with big large-scale planning processes where you're trying to address global change. So you want to maybe see social disadvantage addressed across the globe, where everyone's got equal access to educational opportunities and so forth. And that may be the driver that will get you to engage with particular change. So that's a few different approaches there. And I've given you a couple of documents that you can look at around that, but I'll just take you through one more before we run out of time. This is a paper that I wrote on this issue a number of years ago now, but it still has some validity, I hope. So this is looking at a socio-ecological model for ICT integration. So introducing technology into schools. And in this, those same change factors were given different names. So at a microsystem level, that was your individual and interpersonal aspects. So the things that would influence you as an individual. Mesosystems were the faculty and institutional factors. Exosystems were the level of interpersonal relationships, so a little bit different to the other model. The macrosystems were the culture, and then the chronosystems were a slightly different one. This was change over time, where the main driver factor for you was when these things occurred. So if it was happening at a time when you were happy to engage with a change, because maybe everything else was stable in your life and there was no other curriculum reforms happening at the time and so forth, and so you were then in a position to accept the change because of the particular timings. But at other times, when you've got a whole lot of other curriculum changes happening, maybe in your personal life there's a whole lot of aspects happening, another additional change at that time would just be too much, and where at a different time you may have been quite happy to engage with it. So there's just a few other factors there that you can have a look at in terms of when changes could be introduced or not. Okay, so why have I introduced those papers? Again, it's for you to think about in terms of your implementation plan for your organization. A big part of that implementation plan is how you're going to get people on board. Of course, it's not just you doing the implementation. In any organization, even your own classroom, you've got to get the students on board. You've got to get the parents on board. You've got to get your head of faculty on board, your principal on board. So there's a whole range of people that you need to influence. And in order for that influence to be successful, you need to identify what are the things that are going to get them on board. What are the things that they care about with respect to the change that you're proposing? And that will be different for every individual. It may be a principal that really wants to be well known in society as a leader, and showing them a way that your change will highlight that for that principal may be the thing that gets them on board. But a different principal might be very conservative and want to make sure that there's no controversy that occurs. And so the very that happens doesn't impact negatively on the perceptions of the school or on the organization or on themselves. And maybe it's the organization that they're really focused on, and they want to see that organization seen in a positive light. So any change that you propose needs to highlight the benefits to the organization rather than the benefits to the individual principal, which might have a different perspective on change. So identifying some of these, and in your implementation plan, you can make them up. Okay, you can make up your own the factors and the personalities and the organizations and what might change them. But what I'd like to see in your assignment is that you've thought about the fact that different groups and organizations and individuals have different influencing factors, and that you've built into your planning ways of addressing those influencing factors. Any questions or comments on that? Now, you don't need to go overboard on this. It's only a minor aspect of the implementation plan, but it can be a very important process in terms of whether or not your implementation plan is in reality successful or not. Of course, as much as we can have the perfect plan, it really is dependent upon the personalities and elements that need to be manipulated in order to have that implementation plan achieve success.
Jason, I think what you said about the chrono system, the timing, is extremely important, because even within your own career, you know, there are seasons in your life, there are seasons in your career. And so the baby boomers, if you like, I'm the youngest of those, we're all retiring in the next decade or less now. And many of my colleagues don't want to be involved. They've seen so much change in the system. Now they're at a point where we just want to sit on our hands and wait and, well, I don't, but sit on your hands and wait and see, because if you wait long enough, something else will come down. So unfortunately, that's such a pervasive attitude. So I really like that timing aspect of your thinking, because it's crucial, I think.
It is. It's one of the key elements, but it is one that's, once you've identified it, it's not that hard to influence. Showing them immediate benefits and outcomes is one of the key aspects, but also in terms of long-term effects upon their retirement, for example. Having a society where students have got enough money in the economy to support them in retirement, so that all their pensions aren't eroded and removed by the government. Of course, we don't have enough money. That may be a bit of a difficult one to convince people of, but the immediate benefit is the approach I normally put to them. So you make sure that those people have got immediate outcomes from the change that you're proposing, and you don't bother trying to convince them of the big long-term picture and the advantages to the organisation and advantages to society. You show them the immediate benefits that they can gain from it, and that their students can gain. Because one of the great things of working with teachers is that they'll do almost anything for their students. If they can see a benefit to the students, they'll put in the effort to have that achieved. There's very few other workforces that are so easily influenced by an external factor than teachers. So how about the others? Is there any other elements that you see in your own countries that you could influence by identifying particular factors that could drive people or inhibit people from adopting your proposed implementation plan? Hutan, any comments?
Honestly, I cannot. I think I cannot understand what you mean exactly about
okay,
that.
so
would you explain more, please?
So one element in your context may be there'll be certain decision makers in allowing the private school that you wanted to set up in Iran to be allowed to occur, that you're going to have to convince them of. So if you want to have access to the internet, then you need to work out what are their fears and how can you assure them that the educational benefits outweigh those fears. So maybe it is that you can implement some filtering or some monitoring of what occurs through the internet access that can then assure them that those particular problems may not exist. But it may also be that a certain group or individual might want to see the prestige of Iranian education improved. So maybe there's some perspective that Iranian education isn't as effective as some other countries, and having a showcase school that highlights Iranian education may be the influencing factor that would allow things to occur. But it's identifying what are the factors that people are concerned about and want to see achieved, and getting them on board by meeting their needs. But it may also be parents. Maybe it's identifying for parents that if they are not perceiving that the education system is being as effective as it could, working out what they want and maybe getting their buy-in that could then influence other people to allow things to occur. I know that's an approach that we'd use a lot here in the West. It may not work in your situation, but there are other approaches that no doubt you could identify. Not that I would certainly advocate it, but in some countries, other influencing factors may be money and other rewards that can enable change to occur, or naming the school after them, or various other elements that you might be able to use to achieve success in what you want to have as your outcome. So Toby, any last words? Thanks, Utan. Toby, any last words from you? Anything about?
What I experience is particularly for families with low socioeconomic backgrounds, they would really hesitate to let the children, particularly buying them laptop, iPad, or so, to get exposed, as it has got some expenses involved in it. But what I would suggest is they already have exposed to mobile technology, mobile phone technology. So that's one way that I would influence them to see all the good or advantages of dealing with it. But what I see is it requires a wide array of awareness to be made at the community level and so on. And it also, there's another context here from, say, a mining industry or any economical activity that is going on. The school that is around that environment, it would be easy to influence as a lot of developments would be coming about.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And both for yourself and for Nav, thinking about other influencing factors, particularly, say, the World Bank and UNESCO, where identifying what they want to see achieved and framing things to meet their needs may be able to address some of the financial difficulties you may have in implementing your plan, by being able to attract significant grants and other supporting mechanisms. So they can be also aspects you can build into your implementation plan. But you should also still identify what would be the driving factors to get them to come on board. And some of that would be around having systemic change in a country, long-term changes, and you'd need to convince them of those elements, because that's what they would be particularly concerned about. Parents and students and teachers may be interested in very short-term gains, but international bodies would certainly be more interested in the long-term gains, and you would need to frame things around that perspective to gain their support.
Great. I've been looking forward to some of these areas as well. So, Jason, I was just having, while I am speaking, I just had a doubt here on the assignment about levers for change and stakeholders alignment with that of proposed actions.
Yeah, that's what we've just been talking about.
Oh, correct. Okay, I confirmed that.
Yep. So these are the levers for change. So identifying what would enable the change to occur, and these are the stakeholders that you need to get on board to achieve those changes. And part of these processes are identifying how you can influence that, which are the levers.
Thank you.
Okay, Nav, any last final questions?
Yeah, may I ask a question, please?
Yes, Utan.
In the last part of the assessment information, there are not nine parts that you have asked about. the last part, number 9, includes 7 parts, but only 250 words. My question is that if when I checked it, when I was writing my draft, when I checked the last part, I recognized that I've answered those questions in the other parts. It's difficult to change the structure to put them all together. Is it necessary to keep the structure as is written here, or we can modify it?
You may modify. And the word elements for the individual parts are also just suggestions. That's just a potential template that you can use. If you wish to modify that, you can do so. You still need to address the criteria, and in the main, you should make sure that all those different elements are included somewhere in your document. But no, you're not bound by that structure. That's just there to help you if you need that structure.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, any other final questions on the assignment or anything else? We've a little bit over time. Okay, then we'll wrap it up and look forward to seeing you next week, where I'm sure you'll have more questions on the assignment.
Thank you. Bye-bye.